This conference will now be recorded.
So now you know it, we will be recorded. And I also see that we are not in the presentation mode, which I have to start now. So we are also having today together with us virtually Dr. Peter Holmgren and two commenting persons from the forest-based industries. We have Margarita Micelli and Fanny Pomlang. And we are also very happy to welcome Alfonso Gutierrez Teira, who's the head of sector for forestry in DG Agri, so the European Commission Department of Forestry, Agriculture. Some house rules maybe before we start. So, okay, so like in every good event, there's always some hiccups, and now we have had the whole load of them, so we can trust that that's enough for the rest of the conference. So some house rules first. To keep the audio quality good for all the participants, please do not use the camera unless you are the speaker, and please mute yourself so that we don't have the background noises or echoes and other annoying things, so that you can all hear clear and well. We will of course want to make this interactive with you so that you have the possibility of make comments and more importantly ask questions. And to that you can use the chat function in the webinar. So I see that the first ones have already found the buttons where to do that, so that's very good. And I can assure you that we will have plenty of time to go through your questions and comments in the second half of the webinar. So, in November 2019, the European Forest-Based Industries published our vision of the European society in 2050 and the essential role that we believe that we can and actually we actively want to play delivering on the carbon neutral goal. To support that vision and in the light of the climate crisis and following the European Green Deal that came from the Commission, we wanted to then publish a study. We took the initiative to commission an independent study on the climate effects of our sector. And we are now very pleased and proud to have it revealed to you today in this webinar. Our researcher, Dr. Peter Holmgren, will run, of course, through the methodology and the results with you in a moment. But this is what you should be paying attention to. The substitution effect of forest-based products is significant. It's not nothing, it's really significant. Almost as large as the forest sink, and together the sequestration of CO2 in the forest and the net effect, it corresponds to 20% of the EU fossil emissions in a year. When we asked Peter to do this study, we told him to be conservative. Since this is the first of a kind study that has been done in Europe for this, we thought that maybe there are gaps in science or gaps in data, and we asked him to play it safe. So don't exaggerate, don't make estimates that make things to look too good, but play it safe, be conservative. So what you will hear today is a conservative calculation, and potentially this substitution effect already today could be bigger, and of course we hope that it will be bigger tomorrow because we will be able to do more production that has this substitution effect. I have now mentioned the word substitution effect several times, so maybe it's good to remind ourselves what it actually means. So the forest-based products, they have a very low climate footprint, and moreover, we can reduce demand with our products for alternative products that are energy and fossil intensive, and that are based on fossil fuels. So substitution effect, in short, is the avoided emissions that can be achieved if people choose the right product. So instead of a fossil-based product, they can choose a forest-based product. And that brings together the substitution effect. But are we alone in this opinion? Well, not at all. So the net sink in the forest and the process emissions, of course, are since long time well-established reporting by governments, but the substitution effect, not yet. This is very strange because we are urged to look at the entire life cycle and to have a systemic approach to our industries in practically all other areas of policy. So obviously it would make sense to do so here too, and wouldn't it? That is why Cepi, together with our partners in the forest-based industry ecosystems, have decided to open the discussion today by publishing this study with you. And we are indeed not alone. We are actually supported by a powerful scientific opinion. The same approach of looking at the systemic impact, including the products, has been present in the recommendations of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, since the beginning, actually 30 years now. So isn't it the time to do something about it? Put a number in it and include it in a reporting. This is the debate we want to start today. The forest-based industries wish to contribute to EU climate action, and we call the EU to look beyond the LULUCF framework that addresses one, but only one, important part of the climate effects of the forest-based sector. Viewing the forest-based sector as a circular bioeconomy is the only approach that provides an accurate evaluation of the forest-based industry's overall positive climate contribution. And the key to appreciating the study results is to look at the overall contribution of forest through the entire system, including forest-based sector products and this substitution effect. We all have heard about the EU Green Deal agenda, and it is, of course, a massive, you could almost say, a tsunami of policies that have been rolled out by the European Commission. And then this is to change the future of the continent, as we have heard from the President of the Commission. But these net carbon sinks in the forest are of course already in the plans of the Commission as well to be part of this, how to achieve the European Green Deal, but it's not secured because the projections of continued high levels of net carbon sinks in the forest may not materialize because there are strong forces of nature that are maybe risking that by storms and pests or fire that is likely to increase with the climate change before we get to the climate change mitigation. Possibly more so if large areas of forest are left with little active management for wood production. Actually, some researchers have started talking about climate smart forestry, where active management is used to find an optimal solution with these multiple trade-offs and synergies that you have in the forest system in itself. And then, of course, if you look at this policy map, it's clear that there too, you will have lots of trade-offs and synergies that you have to manage. So this kind of active approach to managing forest, including what happens to the resource that we have in the forest, is an opportunity. Putting this emphasis on carbon storage in the forest, but none on the preventing fossil emissions through substitution, may lead to less reductions of fossil emissions than is possible and necessary. This is actually the paradox of the policy that might happen if people don't hear our messages and pay attention to it. If the positive feedback loop by which demand for timber puts a value on the standing forest is not used, it actually risks to create an disincentive for long-term investment and this active management that is vital, in particular now, when the climate change is really challenging the current status quo. And the opposite, of course, I'll mute some background noises. 1 second when I find my... Thanks. So if If this positive feedback loop by which demand for timber and wood-based products, forest-based products, puts a value on the standing forest is not used, it risks this incentive for long-term investment and active management, like I said. And the opposite, investing in the European forest, in particular now, and managing it actively would, of course, lead to a more stable and increasing sinks and storage, whilst bringing also this sustainable green source for the EU economy. And this is what we want to advocate. And most importantly, when you see these policies and the long-term perspective that we have, many of them will have an impact many years from now. And in the face of the crisis of climate change, may be too late. But the radical thing about the substitution effect is that it is immediate and it's significant, as you will see in the results of the study. Unlike most other climate change mitigation options, this increased substitution is available here and now. We need EU policies that support consumers to move from high carbon products to low carbon forest-based products. And we can do so much to make the European Green Deal a reality. But helping the consumers to do the right thing is what the Green Deal has to do for us in this European forest-based industries ecosystem. We can also back up already with existing numbers why we believe that we can actually make a big difference in this Green Deal and how we can deliver. We have a turnover that is over €500 billion. So we are no longer talking about billions of euros, but €500 billion. And we employ directly 3.5 million workers in Europe. And of course, many more indirectly. And 1 in 5 manufacturing companies in Europe belongs to this forest-based industries ecosystem. So actually we have the muscle if we are given the opportunity to deliver. This time it was Cepi who took the initiative, but we were very pleased to get a strong support from our partners in this forest-based industry ecosystem, and you see the supporting associations here in the slide. 2 of them, Cepi and CPF, we have invited to give a short comment today after we have heard more about the study itself from our researcher, Peter Holmgren. And now actually it is time to give the floor to him. So Peter Holmgren is forestry specialist and the former Director General of the Center for International Forestry Research and the author of this study, and he runs his own consulting and research company called Future Vistas. He's based in Sweden and has a good perspective to this topic. And now maybe my colleague can help me to give the floor to Peter so that he can continue from here.
Okay, thanks, Jori. Thanks for that introduction, and it's good to be virtually in Brussels today. I hope everybody online is coping with the situation. It's been a very strange spring indeed. As Jori said, I'm going to go through some of the methodological aspects of this study and hopefully open a discussion on how we can improve the knowledge base in this area. Can you please confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, good. Now, then if you could please move to the next slide. So what we are going to spend some time looking at is the circular bioeconomy, and particularly the forest-based part of that circular bioeconomy. And in very simple terms, this consists of 2 mutually reinforcing components. There is the forest and there is the forest products. Obviously, wood is supplied from the forest and demand for wood is applied on the forest. There are 2 points to take forward from this simplified picture. One is that the wood demand is a positive feedback on forest management, as you already also mentioned. And the second is that this positive reinforcement is, of course, not only a good thing for the climate, it's been the way we've developed the forest-based economy for many years in Europe. But today we're focusing on the climate aspect. So by that, we can go to the next slide. And then look at the basic biophysics of the forest-based circular bioeconomy. And then we can start by the forest, where we have lots of photosynthesis going on. Biomass is supplied to the value chains, where we are using, reusing, and eventually, in most cases, combusting the forest products, which makes it into biogenic carbon dioxide, which returns to the forest. And as long as we are not harvesting more than the forest takes up, this is again a reinforcing system. We should note here that about 63% of the stem wood growth in Europe is today harvested, which corresponds to as little as 5 to 6% of the total biological production in the forest. We'll come back to those numbers in a little while. Next, please. So if we now take this one step further and we add another box, which is illustrating the part of the value chain. Between the forest and the forest products, we have various forms of forest industry, including also bioenergy facilities. We also know that particularly in Europe, we are quite good at recycling forest products, which means that some of the material re-enters the value chain again. And of course, when we calculate the climate effects, we need to take this into consideration. As you can see, the biogenic carbon dioxide is not only coming from the forest products themselves. A fair part of it comes from the processing in the industry, where lots of energy is used for the processing, and of course most of that is bioenergy. And we also have a fairly large proportion of what I call traditional energy use, which means wood fuel, and at the European level this is quite significant. As you can see, I've also started to illustrate that we have a net sink in the forest at the European level. And this entire system, of course, operates in the biosphere and the atmosphere, which means that the fossil emissions are not yet taken into the equation. But if we do that, next please, and we start thinking about what are the points of interaction between the forest-based circular economy and the global climate, then we need to add the fossils, and we need to consider society's total fossil emissions. And we've identified 5 points where the system interacts with the global climate. And I'm going to illustrate them one by one on this slide. Next, please. The first one we know well. It's the net forest sink. It is what is reported through the LULUCF and the IPCC guidelines. And there are official statistics available for all countries that signed the Kyoto Protocol for each year. As we know, this is a very strong sink in Europe. We'll get back to the numbers in a little bit. Next, please. The second interaction is also well known, and that's been identified as the harvested wood product sink. This is also reported in the official climate reporting. It's available as official statistics from each country for each year. Next, please. Then, of course, we have some fossil emissions in the value chains of the forest-based sector. In relative terms, this is quite small. Most of the energy in this processing is, as I mentioned, coming from bioenergy. And increasingly, the fossil energy is being phased out of the industry. But it's still there, and in absolute numbers, this is still a significant numbers, which we'll come back to. Next, please. The fourth point is what we have already heard from Jori, the substitution effect. And I'll go into some more detail what that actually is and what some considerations are. The main point is, of course, that the products from the forest means that we don't need products or energy based on fossils, and we put a plug in some of the flow of society's total fossil emissions. An issue with the substitution effect is that it's not visible in the official climate reporting. It is implicitly there because the emissions from other sectors are lower than what they would have been if the forest-based sector didn't exist. But since it is in other sectors, reported in other sectors, it is somewhat difficult to relate to the forest-based sector and somewhat difficult to bring into the policy discussion. And this is very much what the discussion today is about. Next, please. And then finally, we have some effects of the quite large traditional energy use from the forest in Europe. It's mainly because a very large part of the harvested volume is used for this purpose. And this is also something that is potentially a topic for discussion. What do we actually do with the biomass from the forest? Next, please. There are a few points that need attention in this graph. The first one is that the net sink is, of course, well established. It's reported, but sometimes it's excluded. And one place where it is excluded is in IPCC's own global models. If you look at the estimates of land emissions from the report that came last year, the growth of the forest is excluded from that number, which means that the efforts we make to make the forest grow and to avoid damages in the forest are not taken into account in these models. And the growth is considered to be a natural response. This is maybe not a big matter, but it's important to know that the net sink is treated in different ways in different places of the climate discussions. The second part is that the biogenic carbon dioxide is still a subject to argument in by some. And the main argument goes that it's still an emission of carbon dioxide. It still affects the global climate. And because it is urgent that we reduce our emissions of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, we should rather let the forest stand and not use the biomass and emit the carbon dioxide fairly rapidly compared to leaving it in the forest. There are some valid points in this discussion, but it is also a fairly simplistic argument, and we can discuss that further if there are any other views on it. Thirdly, as I already mentioned, the substitution is hidden from view in official climate reporting. And finally, the forest, because of the structure of the reporting and the sector delineation in the climate convention and reporting, the forest is separated from the value chain and the circularity. And this poses a difficulty for the argument that after all, renewable material is where we need to go for a fossil-free welfare society in the long run. The way around this that we think is possible is that we identify and quantify the substitution effect and instead present the forest-based sector as a circular bioeconomy in the way that has been shown in these last slides. So from there, next please. From there, I'm going to talk a little bit about the European forest-based sector before we go into the results themselves. Next please. Here I have borrowed a map from the European Forest Institute, which shows the extent of the forest on the continent. And on top of that, I've added blue circles that represent the volume of forest industry output for each country. I've done this to illustrate that the forest-based industry, which is sometimes said to be a matter for the Nordic countries, is perhaps not really a correct picture. As you can see in this graph, there are many countries that are very large forest industry producers, and we should see the forest-based sector much more as a European matter than a matter for the Nordic countries. The forest, well, there's some basic numbers. There is 175 million hectares of forest. That's about 40% of the land area. This forest grows by 800 million cubic meters of stem wood per year. Out of that, about 63% is harvested, which means that the volume is increasing very rapidly. 23% of this harvest is recorded as wood fuel. That's a lot of wood fuel. The forest area on the continent has increased by 8% since 1990. That is equivalent to double the size of Netherlands and Belgium. And at the same time, the standing volume, because we are not harvesting the growth, we are saving a lot of the trees in the forest. The standing volume has increased by 40% since 1990. And this means that we've added a standing volume corresponding to more than double the total volume of the forests in Sweden in the past 30 years. So as you can see, that the dynamics of the forest are quite astounding and opens up for great possibilities when it comes to climate action. The forest products, as we divide them in this study, are wood products, 180 million cubic meters per year, fiber products of many various types, 107 million tons per year, and out of that, the recycling rate that I used from the statistics is 52%. Depends on which product categories you include in this, but overall a very high rate of paper recycling rate. Beyond that, the forest industry and energy outfits that use raw material from the forest also market bioenergy at the level of 324 terawatt hours per year. And this is beyond the energy that is used within the industries themselves. And then in addition, we have the traditional bioenergy, which corresponds to using 85 million cubic meters per year. I find that figure very high and interesting. These numbers will refer to the EU 27 plus 3. The plus 3 are UK, Norway, and Switzerland. And if we now take a perspective on Sweden and Finland, that is often said to be the forest countries in the Union. Yes, we have a very large part of the forest area, about 29%. We actually have less of the growth, only 22%, and that's mainly because it's much colder up here. And we have actually even less of the total output, about 20%, and that's because the recycling, that is a very large part of the production, happens mainly in other countries. So this is a snapshot of the current flows of growth and products in Europe. And if we take all these numbers and now try to convert them into the model that I described earlier, we shall see what happens. Before that, I want to mention something more about the substitution effect. So next, please. First, on the terminology. Sorry, we can go back to that. We can go back one slide. Thanks. So first on terminology, substitution effect is a wording that I've increasingly found to be perhaps not sufficient. It kind of suggests that the forest-based products are the alternatives, whereas the fossil-based one would be the mainstream. And I would like to try and broaden the picture a bit and instead say what it is actually about. And what it actually is about is to eliminate demand for fossil fuels. Another word that has been used many times is displacement of fossil emissions. It's also important to acknowledge that when, for example, IPCC studies the substitution effect, they are looking at the substitution effect on the margin. That is, how can we increase the output from the forest-based sector so as to reduce emissions from fossils. And that's fine, but there is also a different perspective that we need to take into account, and that is the perspective of looking at the forest-based output as a whole. That is not just the marginal effect of increasing the output, but looking at what are we delivering today and how much does that impact the demand for fossil fuels. I'm just mentioning this because there are some different perspectives that haven't been altogether visualized. Now, next please. So when we look at the substitution effect, first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is the question? And the question, as we formulated them in this study and in most studies that have looked at different aspects of substitution, is how many tons of fossil carbon remain underground for each ton of carbon in the forest-based products themselves. So if we look at, for example, bioenergy, it's easier to visualize. If we have 1 ton of carbon that we, in the form of wood, use for energy, how many tons of fossil carbon remains underground because we can produce the energy from renewable material? If we talk about wood construction, it's more complicated because it is not only the material as such that is replaced, but also the whole processing of construction, transportation, and other matters that impact the total emissions during the life of that construction. And similarly for fiber-based products, it is not straightforward to identify what the total substitution effect is, but we still try to use the same measure, that is tons of carbon by tons of carbon. How many tons of fossil carbon is remaining underground for each ton of carbon in the forest-based product? There are some issues here. One issue is that in taking this approach, we focus very much on details of the products and the uses of these products rather than systems analysis. So we are probably risking to miss the complete picture of the forest-based sector and its role in climate mitigation. LCA studies are very useful, but they're also very detailed. So this is something that we should focus on when we move forward. Secondly, because there hasn't been any explicit or formal reporting on substitution, as I mentioned, it is implicitly present in the official climate reporting. But since there hasn't been any explicit reporting, there also hasn't been any standards for the methodologies that have evolved. And this means that the research results are, first of all, limited, and secondly, sometimes difficult to compare. There is a very strong consensus that the substitution effect is there and that it is large, and there is some consensus on the levels of it, but there are issues with the standards in this area. And finally, when we talk about substitution effects for broad product categories, we're also concealing products that have very high effects. The highest I've encountered is when you substitute in food packaging, you substitute a steel can by a paper-based packaging. Then you arrive at a substitution effect that is very high, much higher than the substitution effect for solid wood in construction. But on the other hand, you also have fiber products where you don't have any substitution effect at all, or at least only the effect that the final use for bioenergy is delivering. So we need to figure out what the policy guidance should be here, because from a climate perspective, obviously we would like to use the biomass in a way that reduces the fossil emissions as much as possible. Of course, in taking into consideration all other aspects of sustainable development and benefits from the produce. So the substitution effect is not straightforward. It is not a final conclusive measure, but we've done as much as we can with the current knowledge in this study. Next, please. So the factors then that we have applied are as follows. For solid wood products, we have arrived at 1.5 tons of carbon by tons of carbon. This is reasonably well acknowledged in different research studies, and there are lots of different LCAs done on different kinds of wood construction, and we feel that this is a reasonable and reasonably conservative estimate. For the fiber products, we have used 1 ton of carbon by ton of carbon. This is the most difficult number to verify. In some earlier studies, the substitution effect has been approximated to be the same as for bioenergy. That is, we can count on most of it being used for bioenergy in the end, which leads to some substitution, but we are not really ready to say that the fiber product itself is substituting for fossil-based products. At the same time, there are, as I mentioned, packaging products that are very clearly delivering substitution effects. We also have recycling of many fiber products that potentially provide additional rounds of substitution, although this is difficult because also plastic can be recycled. At the end of the day, we've looked at the available studies and arrived at one as a fair approximation, again, very conservative for fiber products. I can mention here that the substitution of a steel can by paper-based packaging in food packaging, you can arrive at a factor of 10. The next is marketed bioenergy. For this area, again, it varies across different countries how the bioenergy is actually produced. In some countries, it's used to produce just electricity, which is a fairly low performance, using something like 30% of the energy content of the bioenergy. In other places, for example, in my country, we have combined heat and power units that deliver a very high rate. 98-99% of the energy content actually is taken care of. Earlier studies have used 0.7. We've reduced this a little bit because we feel that compared with the earlier studies that were for Northern Europe, the Nordic countries mainly, I think we are a bit lower for Europe as a whole. And then finally, for the traditional bioenergy, we didn't have any studies to go on. We can assume that the substitution is considerably lower, but it is still there, and we can assume that most of the houses that are heated by wood would otherwise be heated by, for example, gas or other fossil heating systems. So that's the factors we've applied, and if we do that, we can go to the results. Next, please. Yeah, and next. If we go back to the figure I showed before, we had 5 points of interaction with the global climate, and it is for each of those 5 that an estimate of the climate effect has been made. They are summarized in this figure, but I will take you to the next slide to make it more readable. So next, please. This is my final slide. So the overall results using this model, using the production numbers that exist of very high quality for the European countries, and using the substitution effects as I have described are as follows. The net sink in forest, extracting it from the national inventory reports of each country, the WWCF 4.A category, is for a climate positive effect of 406 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. This, of course, reflects that we are harvesting only less than 2/3 of the growth in the forest. One question becomes, how long can we continue to save biomass in the forest before we reach equilibrium or because of more damages in the forest, etc. Secondly, the harvested wood products, as reported in the national inventory reports, amount to 41 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. Now we have some people unmuted, so let's see if we can, thank you. Thirdly, the fossil emissions in the value chain. For this category, some parts are well known, like the use of fossil energy in the industry units. The large industry units are well reported. Others are less well established. For example, the transport emissions of wood from the forest and of products to customers. We've done some studies in Sweden and some other places. So we have some numbers to go on and have been able to extrapolate that for the continent as a whole. In short, transport is a big factor of fossil emissions that remain in the forest-based sector. Input goods have not been included. It's too difficult to find a reasonably comparable number on the input goods. And it also opens up questions about where you put the system boundary in terms of end products in the model. But overall, we arrive at 51 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. The substitution effect of industry products is estimated at almost 400 million tons per year. And as I mentioned, this is a conservative calculation. It's based on available literature. And what we do today is not to provide the final number of this, but we're opening up a discussion that this is indeed a very large effect that should be included in the discussions of how the forest-based sector can best contribute to the climate discourse. And finally, the substitution of traditional bioenergy, it does contribute, but it is, as you can see, at a lower level. If we then add up all these, we arrive at the total climate effect. And I use the wording climate effect so as not to confuse it with reduced, with other more biophysical estimates and IPCC reporting, etc. The climate effect is 806 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year, which is, as you already mentioned, about 20% of the European Union emissions. The question is, what do we now do with this, shall we say, new perspective? What will it mean to policies and efforts in strengthening the forest-based sector? This is, I guess, part of the commentary and continued discussion. So I thank you for the attention, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very thorough and good running through the whole system that you have built there. It's very impressive and helpful for us. Now we have the first comment coming from one of these partners we have in this forest-based industries ecosystem, and of course you should start from the forest. So we start from the Confederation of European Forest Owners, and we have Secretary General Fanny Bom-Lang with us. The floor is yours, Fanny.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all see me and hear me. Thank you very much, Yuri. Thank you for the invitation to say a few words about this very important study. A lot have been said already with the presentation from Yuri and Peter, but I may add a few elements or maybe insist on some elements from the perspective of the forest sector, sorry. Well, I think we all agree that the reorientation towards a fossil-free circular bio-based economy is indispensable, is a must to reach our climate goal. And in this context, the EU forest sector and forest-based sector have a very, very important role to play to achieve the climate goal, including the 2050 climate neutrality goal at EU level. We as CPF, as it was mentioned by Yuri, we have put our logo on this study. We welcome this study, we support it, because it brings new insight, in particular, as rightly explained by Peter, on the substitution aspect, the substitution benefits that is brought by the forest-based sector. And these insights allow to present a rather complete and balanced pictures on what are the climate benefits, the multiple climate benefits that the forests and forest-based sector can provide. From the forest perspective, we usually say in CPF that sustainable forest management allows to provide three main climate benefits. It's the sequestration of carbon in growing healthy forests. It's the storage of carbon in wood products and in forests. And it's the substitution that was deeply explained by Peter. And with these three main climate benefits, it allows us to have to maintain or even increase our carbon sink, to store carbon in products, and to consume less fossil fuel, meaning less emissions. Since the last decades, as far as forests are concerned, and it was also mentioned by Peter, the EU forests have steadily increased the area as well as the stock of wood in forest and the carbon in forest. And there are many reasons for this increase. We can, for example, mention afforestation, but also active forest management with more new techniques, modern techniques, research and innovation, but also the fact that we harvest less than the annual increment, and that was also mentioned. Despite these positive developments, we know that our forests today are under a growing risk and uncertainty due to climate change impacts, natural disturbances. I can mention fires, droughts, storms, and in this context, sustainable forest management, active management is the key to maintain our forest healthy and resilient. And this health and resilience is a must to continue to provide these three main benefits that I have mentioned: sequestration, storage, and substitution. So the starting point for reaching this climate goal is actually the management of forests, to continue to have healthy and resilient forests. And according to us, the Cepi study confirms that what we usually say, that it's not either or. So it's not, in terms of climate choice, it's not either increasing the sink and just leaving the carbon into forest, or using the wood. Actually, all is working together in an integrated system, and in which the synergies among the different climate benefits have to be streamlined. And this is what we think the study brings, and it brings this on the table and to the debate. And we are very happy for that. As a concluding remark, I could also mention that CPF, we have signed this 2050 vision that Yuri mentioned in introduction, and together with our partners from the sector, we are ready to become what is mentioned in the vision as the most competitive, innovative, and sustainable provider of net zero carbon solutions to reach our climate goal. So we really hope to continue to provide these benefits. And I think the right question was raised by Peter at the end of the presentation, and now what do we do? And as far as we are concerned in CPF, what's happening now with the outcomes of these results, we really hope that they will be used in the ongoing EU policy debate, We have a lot of initiatives and policies now on the table, coming mostly from the EU Green Deal. And we really hope that this deal will be one of the inputs to feed the debate and be taken into account for further EU policy developments. So that was my comments and reactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fanny Pom. Very, very good. Then we have a second comment from Margarita Micheli from the European Confederation of Woodworking Industry, CEPUA. Margarita, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, I assume so.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jori, for the introduction and for the invitation. I speak on behalf of CEPUA, the Confederation of Woodworking Industries, and I bring you the greetings of our Secretary General, Patrizio Antonicoli, who couldn't be here today. I have two main comments to make on the study. One is why did the CEPUA choose to endorse it? Well, this answer is very simple. It's because it is in line with the principles that we have been advocating for some time now, which is, as both Fanny Pom and you said, a comprehensive approach to the climate benefit of forest and the forest-based industries. So something that also takes into account the substitution effect of wood. Of course, this is particularly relevant for our sector because, as Peter Holmgren just said, the substitution factor is actually higher for solid wood products, the highest, and consequently for construction products. The value that was used is 1.5 substitution effect per ton of carbon. Often in CEPUA, we use the value for expressing cubic meters, because in fact, if you take construction, 1 cubic meter of wood is lighter than the equivalent in cement or steel. So probably the climate benefit on a life cycle basis is even higher. So yes, indeed, timber buildings are allies in the Green Deal, in the overarching climate neutrality goal that the Green Deal sets, and this is possible also because of innovative technologies, the so-called engineered wood products that basically allow to build with wood beyond the limits that were the traditional limits in terms of rise. So it is now possible to build urban buildings that are larger and higher, thanks to the structural performance that engineered wood products provide. It is very important. I think one element that Peter Holmgren said. So the importance of considering the systemic effect of this technology. There are a few studies that try to calculate the climate effect of scale up the climate effect of wood in construction, both at European level and at global level, and both are very encouraging in this respect. There was a briefing from the European Forest Institute that came out this spring that calculates the doubling the share of wood in construction in Europe could lead to overall savings of 100 million tons. In fact, in our joint forest-based vision 2050 that Fanny Pom mentioned before, we even want to be more ambitious. In fact, we want to triple the market share of wood in Europe, which is now around 10%, we can say. And the other study that I wanted to mention is a nature sustainability study that also came out earlier this year, that basically really underlines the same principle that we have been discussing now in this seminar, which is the need to enhance the carbon pools, both in the forest, but also in the cities, what we might call urban forests. So using the building stock as a carbon bank, if you allow me. This having in mind that at global level, we will need to build for 2 billion people. So we will have to provide new housing for 2 billion people by the mid-century, by 2050. So to come to Peter Holmgren question, what do we make of this approach? What are the consequences that we could, or suggestions that we could provide to policymakers? In fact, for what concerns our sector, the woodworking sector, I will say that it is very important when considering the contribution of construction to the objectives of the Green Deal. It is very important to move beyond simple energy efficiency metrics to life cycle assessment of the climate performance of a building. So also considering embodied carbon metrics. And this is which allows to calculate also the reduced effect of processing timber construction products, building, and then disposal. And this is something I have to say that is mentioned, that is starting to be taken into account by EU policy, and most notably in the latest Circular Economy Action Plan. Then the second and last comment that I want to make to this study concerns the economic potential that this approach has, because considering the climate benefit or climate effect of forest in this way, in this comprehensive way, not only is compatible with economic growth, but it is actually a driver. Now you know that construction has been identified as one ecosystem in the European post-COVID-19 Recovery Action Plan. It has been identified as one ecosystem that should attract investment to reboot the economy. Of course, we agree with that, but we also think that the entire forest-based system or sector, so both the forest sector and the industry, are effectively a very important European ecosystem. It is a value chain that brings together small and big enterprises, that brings together research institutes and centers, technology providers, and also has a very relevant contribution to give to the European economy. Is the number that Yori gave at the end of his speech. We are talking about 20% for number of enterprises. We are talking about 20% of the total manufacturing sector, and 10% of the total employment in the manufacturing industries in Europe. So my very final comment is it's crucial that the Green Deal and the policies that will be implemented under the Green Deal recognize this contribution, and across the different ecosystems or sectors that have been identified, because that it will be to overlook this contribution would probably be a mistake on the basis of what we have just heard from this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margarita. Very, very good. Then we are very happy to introduce the guests from DG Agri, so the department of the European Commission that is responsible for agriculture and rural development. We have Alfonso Gutierrez Teira, who's head of the sector for forestry. I hope you can hear us and then we can hear you. Alfonso, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to first apologize because I had problems to connecting through the GoToMeeting application with my laptop, and I am speaking through the mobile phone. So this can limit a bit maybe the quality of the sound or of the video signal that I will try to connect now. So first, this apologies from my side. Second, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this webinar presenting this very interesting study, which I think is a good source of information for the policy developments we have ahead of us, which are quite a few, as you know. I've been probably invited to give the most boring part of this webinar, which is the policy perspective. And I will try to go through the key elements of this policy perspective. But I think there will be in my presentation a lot of convergence with what has been said up to now. If you can move to the next slide, to the first slide. Well, the key element of this policy perspective, as you have mentioned already, is obviously the Green Deal, which contains the commitment from the Commission to shift to a new and greener economic growth pathway. The communication on the Green Deal adopted a few months ago sets up as the backbone for this new model the objective to be carbon neutral in 2050. And I think all the full Green Deal growth model builds around this, or building across around this backbone. But this ambition is understood as confirming Europe's commitment to lead the global climate action, but also it recognizes that this approach can bring many advantages in terms of environment, but also competitiveness, innovation, and jobs through a socially fair and cost-efficient transition. Next slide, please. The Green Deal clearly builds largely on the communication adopted in November 18, a clean planet for all, also known as the long-term strategy, which outlined the vision of the economic and societal transformations required to achieve the transition to climate neutrality by 2050. The long-term strategy also seeks to ensure that this transition is socially fair and enhances the competitiveness of the EU economy and industry, securing high-quality jobs and sustainable growth in Europe, while providing synergies with environmental challenges such as air quality or biodiversity loss. As a result of the scenarios and assessments carried out to build this long-term vision, the strategy looked at a portfolio of options available for member states, business, and citizens to contribute to the aims of this strategy. And it concluded that while combining all the available options can reduce net emissions by around 90%, including the land use and forestry sinks, some greenhouse gas emissions will always remain, even with the most optimistic scenarios. Therefore, remaining GHG emissions in certain sectors need to be compensated for by absorption in other sectors. And here, the role for the land use sectors, including agriculture and forests, is identified. Next slide, please. Forests play a crucial role in achieving the 2050 objectives of balancing emissions by sources and removals by sinks, as they are the main potential sink, and this is recognized in the long-term strategy. Here, the data provided by the study will be relevant because the long-term vision identified that the net sink in the EU is currently about 300 million tons of CO2, which contrasts a bit with the figure of 400 and something that you have presented today. But it also concludes that this sink is not big enough to compensate for the remaining emissions without additional measures. At the same time, the capacity of forests to sequester carbon seems to be stagnating due to several reasons, including the aging of the EU forests, the effects of natural disasters, and the reduced increase in nest forest area. The strategy also identifies the important role of sustainable biomass towards a net zero greenhouse gas emission economy by providing energy in substitution of fossil fuels and also as a substitute for carbon-intensive materials, particularly in the building sector, but also through the new and sustainable bio-based products such as biochemicals. Global and European assessments of the low carbon economy pathways show that a net zero emissions economy will require significantly increasing the amount of biomass compared to today's consumption. But even with improved sustainable forest management practices, existing EU forests alone could not deliver that amount without a substantial decline in the EU forest sink and its other ecosystem services, which needs to be avoided. In addition, the long-term strategy also underlines that increasing biomass imports would also raise problems related to emissions from land use change in exporting countries. Next slide, please. The European Green Deal links the role of forests for climate neutrality with the need for a healthy environment and refers to the need that the EU's forested area improves in quality and quantity to achieve both. It also states that a new forest strategy will aim at afforestation, forest preservation and restoration in Europe to help increase the absorption of CO2, improve forest resilience, and promote the bioeconomy. The Green Deal also mentions the need to cover the full forest cycle in the new strategy. Clearly, the objective of the reinforcing the forest sink and developing the bioeconomy are two sides of the same coin, as both will contribute to the climate neutrality goal. The potential trade-offs in optimizing these two sides of the same coin have to be solved, finding the right equilibrium between keeping and increasing the forest carbon stock while providing the adequate supply of biomass for energy and wood product substitution. In my view, there are 4 pillars in the Green Deal that are important for supporting the role of forests in the forest-based sector to achieve this equilibrium. The first element to meet these challenges is the need to increase the forest area through afforestation and forest restoration, or restoration of other areas, probably with reforestation and afforestation efforts as well. This would support building up the European carbon sink while benefiting the biodiversity, the ecosystem services provision, and would increase also the biomass availability. The second element is the need stated in the Green Deal that forest ecosystems improve their resilience and are adapted to the challenges that are facing now due to climate change, because the Green Deal identifies as the key pressure for forests climate change. Basically, for the forests to continue delivering on their multiple functions, their health, our resilience, and also the ecological status are crucial. The role of conservation of biodiversity has also to be highlighted. The third pillar, to find the right equilibrium of the sink and substitution functions of forests and forest-based materials, is the need more than ever to ensure and demonstrate sustainable forest management of the existing EU forests, implementing management planning and techniques that find the right equilibrium of forest composition, age class, and rotation length, harvesting, etc., to build more resilient forests, support the biodiversity and ecosystem services provision, again, and provide materials for the bioeconomy. Next slide, please. No, you can go back. Yeah, The final pillar is that sustainable forest management has to be linked to a robust supply chain that allows the full development of the forest-based bioeconomy to its potential and to deliver on the other dimensions of the new growth model. In this respect, I want to notice that there are many elements in the Green Deal that are of extreme relevance for the forest-based sector, which are related to the promotion of wood use, forestry, etc. Here in this slide, I have highlighted some of them, the most important ones probably, which are those that link the forests with the new climate ambition, with all the initiatives that have been announced in the Green Deal with this aim. The role of forest and forest-based materials for provision of renewable energy and for their role for the renovation wave for the building sector. Of course, the role under the Circular Economy Action Plan that has been mentioned already before me, and also for the mainstreaming efforts, biodiversity conservation, etc. All these will turn in play to provide an important role for supporting the local value chains, the SMEs and the jobs in rural areas, as it's also very well highlighted in the long-term strategy. Also contributing, I think, it's fundamental for us, and particularly for DG Agri, to slow down the abandonment of significant rural areas in the EU. Therefore, the links between the EU forest strategy, the EU bioeconomy strategy, and the support of the CAP are evident in this respect. Next slide, please. All these illustrate the increasing importance of forests, given their multiple functions and contributions to the sustainability challenges for the EU. There are many policies that are putting pressure on the forests and the forest-based sector, and there are often conflicting views and interests from the society that we need to try to match in the new forest strategy. As I said before, we are committed through the Green Deal to a new forest strategy that has been planned to be adopted in the first quarter of next year, 2021. So we are now working at full speed on the reflections to what the strategy should contain. But for us, it will be very important to find the right equilibrium of the four basic elements that I mentioned before for forest and the forest-based sector in the strategy. So this must be key pillars building the forest strategy. And also, of course, the strategy will have to link all these objectives and these elements with the funding opportunities provided by the EU, and also with our international commitments with the forests and sustainability, in particular the 2030 sustainability agenda. If we are able to combine all these elements together in the short document that a communication from the Commission is, that will be a success for the strategy, the forest for the future, and hopefully also for the forests and the forest-based sector. Thank you. I will try now to connect my camera for you to see me, because I was a bit afraid.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. Very, very good framing for the policy framework where we are. And unlike you said, I don't think, and I don't think anybody on the line thought that it was boring at all. So it's very important, of course, to see this policy framework. There was only one question, and now we move to the question-answer mode. You can, like I said, make questions through the chat function, and don't hesitate to send questions. Unfortunately, we can't give you the floor voicing your question, but we will moderate the questions through the chat. There was one question already asking if these presentations will be available later on to you, and then of course we will do that. We will make the presentation available, and also this webinar has been recorded, so also the recording of the whole webinar, so that you hear the presentation from Peter and then Alfonso and then the other speakers will be available. But this first question to Alfonso, you mentioned this role of forest to compensate for the last 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions from other sectors that are not supposed to be doing the full decarbonization only by playing the role of being a sink. So how ethical is that? Wouldn't it be more sustainable and more ethical to have this combined effect of the substitution and the sequestration as the foundation of the EU policy? How do you feel about that?
Yes. I think that actually the vision of the long-term strategy and also of the Green Deal is to reinforce the role of forests as a machine contributing to the climate neutrality objectives. And this, what is clear in the assessments carried out and the scenarios that have been used, is that business as usual forest management is not enough. So you need something to somehow catalyze the machine, and this can be changes. This can be brought from increasing the amount of forest area, afforestation or other means. But I think it is crucial that sustainable forest management on one side, and then counting on the role of the substitution effects, and then keeping the machine for absorbing carbon in the natural forest alive will be crucial. And this I don't see. Well, there are several options, but clearly one of them is to really enhance the role as substitution, the substitution role effects of wood and forest products. So I think it is widely recognized that this is the way forward.
Sorry,
Yuri,
you
were
yes.
muted. Yeah.
So there was a question to Alfonso. So the question reads, as we move to net zero by 2050, would the Commission, for instance, consider changing consideration of biomass use in power generation as carbon neutral? Now you have the same problem, Alfonso, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Sorry, because I lost you for a while, so you can repeat the question, please.
Okay, so the question was word by word, as we move to net zero by 2050, would the Commission, for instance, consider changing consideration of biomass use in power generation as carbon neutral?
I think this is well. We're speaking of long-term vision to 2050, but I think that all the directives and the regulations on energy and climate are subject to revision clauses periodically, and I think that it is widely acknowledged that the role in energy production from forests can be at some point replaced by other sources of renewable energy. So I think depending on the technological, political developments, etc., this role will be for sure revised in the future. Yeah. But I think there will be a need for a strong technological, theoretical basis to really move forward and start to consider different options to those that are being used now in policy making.
Thank you, Alfonso. Then there's another question. As you see, that it wasn't boring at all what you said, because it triggered all these questions we didn't get before. So there's another question. Can we expect the revised forest strategy to truly encompass the full forest-based value chain? From your presentation, Alfonso, it seems that as if DG Agri's focus presently is very much on the early parts of the value chain, so only in forests?
No, indeed, our intention is to try to cover all the elements, as I mentioned. It is true that we probably my presentation focuses mostly on the forest side because it is what we mostly take care of in DG Agri, as you know. But the EU Forest Strategy will be a joint effort of all the relevant DGs in the Commission. So there will be, of course, a very important side that will be about how to keep forests and enhance the role of forests, because it is stated like that in the Green Deal. And also because we are going to be working together with the environment, we are going to co-lead this strategy. So there will be, for sure, a very important role for the issue of forest management, afforestation, reforestation, restoration, etc. But I also wanted to try to highlight in my presentation that the Green Deal is about much more than just forests. And we have to find the right links in the forest strategy with other very relevant pieces of policy that are committed in the Green Deal and also ongoing already. Just to mention a few, there will be a full revision of the energy policy. There will be a full revision of the climate policy. There will be a new adaptation strategy, which is crucial for us, I think, as well, not only for the forest, but also for the forest-based sector, probably, which will have to react to the issues that climate, the challenges that climate is posing on us. We have to fully develop the circular economy strategy, the bioeconomy strategy that was adopted already last year. So I think the strategy will be as comprehensive as we will be able to manage within the limited extension of 10 to 15 pages that is allowed for us to develop it. But the role of the forest-based sector, of the forest-based industries, will for sure be within the strategy. We will work also with the colleagues in DG Grow and in other DGs to ensure that the main elements will be there.
Thank you, Alfonso. We are looking forward to your pages later. There's another question that is, I think, very, very interesting, and maybe this is better answered first by Peter, but by all means, other speakers can also comment on that if you feel like. But very interesting question. If we have today already 20% of the EU emissions being mitigated by forests, and if EU aims only 10% to be covered later, which was from the slides of Alfonso, couldn't we reach the net zero of EU earlier than 2050? Peter, do you have a view on this?
Yes, thank you. I don't want to meddle with the policy preparations here, but I think there are a few things to keep in mind. One is, and some have touched on it already, the carbon sink is not forever. The second is that we need to ask ourselves, why do we have a carbon net sink in the first place? Well, it is because we have some value chains that are putting a value on the forest and the wood, and therefore we have invested in forest management, which has increased the growth and decreased the damages on the forest. So there is a clear connection between the value chain and the forest, and that's what we often are missing in the policies. Can we reach net zero before 2050? Well, we have to be optimistic, and we have to. I am certainly optimistic that the forest-based sector can make a very strong contribution to achieving that. But then we have to step out of the box and look at the system as a whole, and not get stuck in the forest and assuming that we can compensate emissions from other sectors by storing carbon in the forest. That storage is both risky, because we will have damages, we will have fire, we will have pests increasing. And it's also, of course, reducing the possibilities of substitution in other fields. So there is an in-depth analysis that needs to be made to see how we can enhance the contribution of the forest-based sector. And that analysis will have to focus a lot on the value chains, investments in more efficient bioenergy conversions, investments in more new biomass capture, biomass supply chains, investments in new district heating and cooling systems, etc., etc. So this is a big question, and it is by no means limited to the forest itself. Thank you.
Thanks. Did anybody else want to add anything from your perspective, or are you happy that Peter took the burden to answer that interesting but very, very difficult question? No, then there's another question, I guess, again for Alfonso. You stated that the EU is committed to the European Commission is committed to the Green Deal model. So how do you attract the EU and member states to contribute equally to the goals set there through the set of well-tailored measures? It will be less government dependent on the business sector who might be decisive to see a final success.
I partly missed your question. It is about the contribution of member states to the Green Deal and the forest sector, right?
Well, maybe the crux of the question is that how do you then include the business in making this happen? Because the policy is set by the member states and the Commission or the European Union together, but then the biggest possibility for delivering on the Green Deal is in the end in the business, if I understand the question correctly.
Yeah, well, I think that there is the Green Deal has to be seen as a comprehensive package that is going to provide, on one side, rules and regulations, on the other side, incentives. So there is a full package of incentives to be mobilized, both through the usual EU funds, the EU budget, and also there is this mobilization of the Just Transition Fund and other funds that are linked to the Green Deal that aim at mobilizing the sectors, the industries, the businesses, the citizens, and also the countries. So I think the combination of ambitious legislation, ambitious shared goals by the EU and the member states, and the incentives that are going to be provided should drive the necessary transitions towards the new growth model.
Thank you, Alfonso.
Yeah, the Green Deal contains a full package of issues on the mainstreaming block, where there is this reference to the need for incentivizing the transition. And this is, I think, the key pillar that has to be looked at.
Thank you. Then there's a question to the organizer saying that they are very delighted to see Alfonso, you here and representing DG Agri today. Thank you for that. But they are disappointed not to see anyone from the other departments of the Commission, so DG Grow, Envy, Energy and Climate. And the question is where they invited, and we have to be open about that as Cepi, that we didn't invite them this time because we thought that it would be enough to have now Alfonso representing the Commission's view on this. But our original plan was to have actually a physical launch event in when the study is ready, but you all know the situation with the COVID that we couldn't do that. But we still plan to do that later in September to have an event where we could have all these Commission departments present and have another round of discussions, maybe then also having a bit more visibility on for example, where the forest strategy is going. So we are going to do that still in the autumn. Then there's one more question to Alfonso. So you see that you were not boring at all because you excited so many questions. So EU is revising the 2030 climate targets. Is there a risk or pressure that the LULUCF pillar would lose its zero target? What kind of impact this would have on sectors' other climate benefits, like substitution and carbon storage in products, if that happens?
Thank you for the question. This is a tricky one. First, in reaction to the issue of not having other DGs, I understand it was difficult to have all of us here. But anyway, I think we were asked to provide a policy perspective, and well, we have very clearly defined in the long-term strategy as far as climate neutrality is concerned, in the Green Deal, and also in the forest strategy that we and the environment will be coordinating. So I think there's not much more to say at this stage. Maybe later, as you suggested, it would be interesting to see how things develop, and then it might be worth to invite other DGs at a later stage of developments. On the revision of the LULUCF, well, my understanding, and I'm not working in DG Clima, but my understanding is that this revision will, in any case, have to be very careful, because the LULUCF is just regulation is just starting to be implemented right now. There is all the work carried out to set up the baseline in each member state, but this is still ongoing with all these meetings, expert meetings, etc. So I think that my impression and my understanding is that the revision of the 2030 targets will very carefully assess what will be the implications of modifying regulations and pieces of legislation that are still starting to be implemented. The impact this can have not only on the substitution effects, but also on the organization of the policy departments, of the climate change departments in the member states, the workload that it can add to the different to the experts, the member states, etc. So I think that there will be a need to really consider all the side effects of potentially revising the 2030 targets and all the pieces of legislation that contribute to it.
Okay, thank you very much. Then again, a question that I would imagine that the best person to answer it is Peter, but maybe Fanny Bom can also contribute to that if you feel like. So there's a question, would it be any difference in substitution effect if the wood is sourced from natural forest versus plantation forest? So the kind of wood or forestry, does that have an impact?
Should I start? First of all, there is a terminology thing. I'm not sure what plantation forest is referred to here. It's sometimes used in inconsistent ways. But in terms of substitution effects, not really, unless there are different qualities of the wood, which could be the case. At the same time, at least for the European situation compared to the global scene, I think this is perhaps a non-issue, because most forests that we are harvesting in Europe are actively managed. They are neither very natural in the sense undisturbed by human activity, nor are they plantation in the sense of 7-year rotation eucalyptus. So in general, for the European setting, I don't think this is very significant, the differences.
May I add? Thank you. Yes, I fully agree with what Peter has said. I think it depends what we mean with natural versus plantation. if this is like the way the forests are regenerated, like if we plant or if we leave the forest being regenerated naturally, as we call it, then in that case, I support what has been said. It depends on which type of species will develop and the quality of the wood for the substitution effect. And so I don't think it has an impact if it's naturally regenerated or planted. If there is another definition in this question of what natural forest means in terms of no intervention of human or like something, because sometimes we hear some confusing wording between natural forest, primary forest, old growth forest. There is a bit of a mix. So in that case, I agree as well that in Europe the forests are actively and sustainably managed, so that may not be a question, at least most of the forests. So yeah, if it's just natural regeneration versus plantation, then in that case, I think for the substitution, you have to look at the management decision made afterwards and the type of wood that would go out of the forest.
Yeah, if I may also, I think that the issue of plantations versus natural or semi-natural forests does have more to do with the achievement of other targets or functions for the forests rather than with the substitution effect. So I think that the role of plantations is, for example, recognized by the IPBES report as necessary to help drive the necessary transitions concerning forests for biodiversity protection. So I think the discussion on the forest plantations is more linked to this potential for plantations to replace what other forests could do, rather than to the substitution effect itself. You know?
If I can briefly add something, Yuri.
Please do.
Yeah, there is of course the perspective that, which was touched on before, that given that we're investing in active forest management, we will see an increase both in the growth as such, a decrease in damages, and an increase over time of the possibilities of harvesting wood sustainably. That is what has happened in Europe for many, many years, since long before the climate debate. And of course, that investment in more actively managed forests, which means in most cases more planted forests, will have a positive effect on the substitution effect. But that's a factor of the overall positive feedback of the forest-based sector, not specifically related to the climate.
Okay, I see that there's no more questions coming. If there's one final word that the speakers want to say before we conclude the webinar, now would be a good moment for that. Is there anybody who wanted to still add something after having heard all the other speakers and all the questions?
Maybe I can say something very briefly. Again, thanking for the invitation and for the study that I think is very important. And I think these kind of contributions from the sector to the debates and the discussions that are going to take place in the policymaking cycle are fundamental. The role of forests is being squeezed, I think, and the forestry sector is one of the, I was going to say victims, but it is suffering from this squeezing of the possibilities of forests. And it is very important that the sector is involved, contributes positively to the discussions with tangible products and studies like this one. So I am very, very thankful. I found it very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we had really good participation today from active speakers and interesting information to share, and I think it was a good start. So this is obviously not the end point of this debate, but the starting point. So we really want to start this discussion in Brussels and in the member states by all the stakeholders. The 20% contribution we already have today compared to the EU carbon emissions, it's a lot. And we know that it's just a snapshot of what we have today, what is the contribution today, but we can do more and we want to do more. That's clear. We see that this Green Deal and all the parts of the Green Deal are a possible way of increasing our contribution to that. So we are looking forward to being able to increase our contribution. We are a unique ecosystem that is working both with nature but also with the industry, manufacturing. So we work with nature cycles and as well as the circular economy cycles. Both require this active management that came clearly from Mosix, or for example from Funny Bomb. And the aim we have is that we eliminate as much as possible of the demand for fossil intensive goods so that we can shift the demand to keep the fossil emissions in the ground, like Peter said. And this is what I think we can do more if this integrated system is understood, if the synergies are streamlined, like Funny Bomb said, and if we can work to find the systemic effects all through the systems. It's not easy, we know, and it's always a challenge to have policy that is not worked in silos, but is integrated. But in this topic, it's essential that we get it right, and we are looking forward to supporting Alfonso, you and the rest of the EU policymakers in getting it right in the next months and years. Thank you for everybody for good participation. Like we said, the presentations will be made available later, and also there's a recording of this webinar, so that's available for your colleagues that were not able to see this webinar today. Thank you, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.